You know, when I think about Football Manager tactics, I think a lot about Magic the Gathering. Now, you want to hear me out a little bit on this. Back in the good old days, back in the late 90s, when I was in middle school, we used to play Magic the Gathering religiously when we were at lunch. We played with everything we could. We had all sorts of different cards. We would try different types of decks. This is back in the early days of the internet, so some of us would go on and come up with different strategies and try to make it work with the undervalued, underpriced cards that we had that came from, whatever booster box some guy had, or that came from the shoe box that some other kid had when he sold his cards to us and stuff like that. The cool thing about Magic back then, and the cool thing about it today, is that there are different playing styles that work. There are different things you can do that are successful in the game, right? You don't necessarily have to use a color like, red and do a bunch of direct damage to your opponent. You can win the game theoretically without, throwing a bunch of fireballs at them. You can try to control the game if you play with counterspell Magic. At least you could before they destroyed it, and so on and so forth. I mean, there's all sorts of different styles, there's different philosophies, there's different theories to approach the game, and you can see what happens when different styles meet in the metagame. Football Manager has a problem with this, and we will see this shortly. So we're going back here to FM Arena. I know this isn't the greatest type of video. Things might not be fully clear for you if you're watching this on mobile. My apologies for not being a great editor of video content, but I kind of want to show you how this really is instead of coming up with some sort of like real fancy looking thing for you to look at. We're just going to go look at the website and go look at what comes up here. So on FM Arena, this is, you go over to forum and tactics and you can see all sorts of discussions that people have about different stuff. There's also a lot of stuff here in the tables, including a lot of tactic testing and a lot of results that tell us interesting things about things that are important you might not know about, including player attributes, conditioning of players, different playing positions, like how good your player is at playing the position and stuff like that. We will look at all of this later, and we'll look at this slowly in future videos. What we're really interested in today, though, is in figuring out what works and what doesn't work in terms of certain tactical instructions. And that comes over here in the tactical instruction texting part of the forum. This is where the real interesting stuff comes out, because this is where we can look and see what difference do certain parts of the tactic make to the game overall. For example, as we'll look at today, does it really matter if you play balanced, attacking, very attacking, positive, or defensive, or whatever? Does that make a difference over the long term? Now, when we're talking about this, we're not just talking about somebody slapped together a tactic and we put it out there and we made it work, right? We're not talking about that. What we're interested in looking at is when we take the components apart, when we kind of unscrew the game and we look at it as a whole, as it is, what impact does this certain choice that we're allowed to make in-game, what impact does that have on things overall, right? So this is very similar to what my good friend at Evidence-Based Football Manager has done with training, right? You look at every single component of training individually. You try your hardest to create a testing environment in which other variables do not have a major impact. And then you can look at this and decipher which training instructions, which types of trainings are good, which ones are not good. Then you can look into things like fatigue and other problems like that, right? It's very, very similar here. What we're looking at is how tactics, different tactical instructions have been tested over like almost 5,000 individual matches. This is to sort of keep the random number generator at bay so that we can then figure out, okay, so this probably has this kind of effect or that kind of effect on the game. Now, if Football Manager worked the way the Magic the Gathering works, theoretically, you could be full-out attacking or you could be full-out defensive, right? There's a real famous article in the Magic the Gathering world that was published probably when I was in high school or something, by which time I wasn't playing anymore. It's called something like Who Got the Beatdown or something like that. And it's all about how when you're playing, you need to know whether you are the better deck or not, to know whether you should be offensive and try to go for the win, or if you should play a little bit more defensively and try to stop the opponent from winning and try to sneak one in past them, right? That should sound familiar to you if you're familiar with how football works, right? It's the exact same thing you see in a game, right? If you're the weaker team, you don't want to be attacking. Instead, you want to try to absorb the attack and try to get a counterattack and try to slip one past. That's the way the Football Manager should work, right? Is that the way it really works? Well, let's find out. Go over here and look at mentality. So what Zippo, who's one of the best posters I've seen anywhere, has done is he's created very, very basic tactics with like nothing in them and just a mid block. There's no instructions at all, and this is a real basic shape, which allows us to test out the mentality and see what happens. I say us. I'm not the one who did this. He is the one who's done all of the work. I do want to call your attention to this. And so we have the choices between very defensive, defensive cautious, balanced, positive attacking, and very attacking. And so what is this here? We have tested each mentality through 2,880 matches each. Then the results were translated to a standard season of 38 matches. Now, this is using, I presume, at least the very same generic team. No team has any sort of advantage over another team. The shape is the same as we've seen. Everything else is the same. We're just changing the mentality. And what we see here is what I would consider to be pretty significant, right? The difference here between playing with, say, a positive or attacking tactic and a very defensive tactic is quite significant. I mean, we're talking about on average like 6 points per 38 game season just with that difference alone. In other words, if you're thinking I need to play really defensively in this match against whatever it is, this team that's bigger than me, I'm going to go with a very defensive mentality. If you're doing that, regardless of the shape of your tactic, regardless of how good your players are, you're playing with a major disadvantage. You're playing with a huge disadvantage compared to what would happen if you played with a balanced attack, right? Oh, look, you might not give up as many goals, but you're going to score significantly fewer goals. You're going to score, on average, 11 fewer goals, and you're going to give up, on average, 4 fewer goals, right? It's not really the sort of trade-off that you want. Now, does this mean that very defensive and defensive mentalities are completely worthless in the game? Not really, not necessarily. I suppose you can get it to work. But if you're looking to try to figure out why everybody on the forums, everybody who creates tactics, everybody who creates videos, why everybody plays with like a balanced, positive, or attacking tactic, this is the reason why. Is because a lot of us have played the game before and we've tried different things. We've listened to what the assistant manager says. We put the team at defensive or very defensive, and then we just gave up goals, or we didn't score anything, or the team didn't play well at all. This is a problem. This is a major problem. The reason why this is a problem is because if the metagame worked the way that it should work, that is, if a defensive setup or a cautious setup with a counterattack attached to it, if that could theoretically be a counter to a team that is gegenpressing and that's attacking and that's really bringing the game to you, if that were the case, we wouldn't see the significant difference just from the mentality alone, right? That's what the problem is. Really, in Football Manager, I would argue these need to be, holding everything else equal, these need to be about the same. And maybe the very defensive team scores fewer goals but gives up quite a few fewer goals than a team that's very attacking, right? You don't want to see the sort of spread that we're looking at. Again, I got to emphasize this is after, what did he say, 3,800 matches, is that right? 2,880 matches, but a very, very significant number of matches, right? We're talking like 100 seasons that are being simulated using this very, very basic formulation. When you see that and you understand what that means, there's no real advantage that you gain from being very defensive. And defensively, it's the same as being cautious or defensive, right? You're not gaining anything by doing this. You're just stopping yourself from scoring more goals. This is a problem. This is a problem, right? Absolutely, because a more defensive mentality should result in fewer goals being scored if everything else is held equal. Similarly, when you look at attacking tactics, very attacking doesn't give you much more than attacking does, but it has you conceding far more goals than you would have if you had been attacking or if you'd been positive, right? This is a problem. This is a problem. This is not really the way that it should work, and this is the reason why everybody's tactics look just about the same. Now, I know somebody will say, well, this is all old stuff, right? This is right after FM23 came out, November 15th, 2022. I presume this is using FM23. It might be using FM22. I'm not 100% sure. I wasn't around at that time and probably have my dates off. But regardless, the overall story here is the same. Now, this can change as Football Manager continues to make tweaks, or Sports Interactive, I should say, makes tweaks, and as the match engine changes, and you know how this is. Everybody always gets up on the forums and will complain about this and that. I just showed you the other day a knap tactic for FM24 that was set on very attacking, which is kind of a rare thing to see, right? It's possible there might be something about some iteration of the match engine that allows this tactic to be marginally better. But I very, very strongly suspect that if we're talking about like playing these tactics out, holding everything else actually equal, and playing these out over like 4,000 games, we're going to see whatever little advantage it is you get from being very attacking go away. We'll talk about this more in later videos. One of the problems that you have with tactical testing environments is that the team that you use will impact your tactic, right? Many people who test tactics don't realize that and end up just using the best possible team that they can, which creates a problem. We'll talk more about this later. Hope you're having a good day. Talk to you later. Bye.